the presentation. So it should be recording now.
Perfect.
So I've got the disadvantage of looking at my PowerPoint and not being able to see you guys and your reactions. But yeah, thanks for the great introduction, Nick. You know me, this is probably going to be the hardest talk I've given in the last year because I don't really like to talk about myself and some of the stuff. So I'm going to try to put this all in context of the broader IMET experience and how it applies to the group. I will say this, like, as Nick had said, I did work in the space shuttle program for the end of the program and for the closeout for a number of years. So got to work my dream job. But I will tell you that being an IMET, working with the fire crews, the incident management teams, all the different people out there that are really pulling together when we need it most is as gratifying and as fulfilling as working in the space program. So I think the two go hand in hand, and hopefully we could talk about a little bit about both of those or each of those, and I'll answer some of your questions. So as Nick said, my name is Kurt Van Speybroeck. Part of the beauty of having a name that's so unique is that I'm very easily identifiable, so hard to forget, whether it's good or bad. So I have to make sure that I do most everything cleaner, better, and faster than a John Smith or a Brian Miller or somebody like that. So hopefully, if you see my name in the future, it'll bring up good thoughts and good memories of times that we've worked in the past. So let me go ahead and start this talk. Everything you wanted to know about incident meteorologists, but we're afraid to ask. I always like to start off with what is an IMET? And that's what we call ourselves. So, is it a super intelligent, witty meteorologist from the Weather Service, the most accurate meteorologist on station, someone serving probation time due to a previous arson conviction, volunteer forecaster looking for easy weather to forecast, and the proper answer is none of the above. So what I would like to show you is what I think an IMET is. We are volunteers because this duty is a volunteer participation. Not every Weather Service meteorologist is in the IMET program, and nor does every IMET that gets into the training program does not always reach certification. And we could talk a little bit about what that looks like down toward the end of the presentation, because I think that is probably the hardest part of the job, is not passing somebody, telling them that they need to go back and do more work or that they're not going to make it. I've had to do that once, and it's pretty tough. So we have approximately 85 meteorologists in the Weather Service at any given year that are active in the IMET program. And just based on availability, more like 45 to 50 that will be able to get out during a season and actually onto a fire. We do have currency standards, and you have to go onto a fire or to an active incident once every 3 years, or at least hit the continuity of excellence exercise training run in Boise for the incident meteorologist, and that's run every year. So we do try to stay current, especially on all of our procedures, but also on all of the ICS changes and changes in the different land agencies and how things get done. If you can't tell from this talk, almost every IMET across the board has a profound sense of engagement with their team or their crews. I don't know how you couldn't have this working in the environment that we work in, with the stress we work with, the hours, the things that are at risk, not only the assets, but especially the people that are at risk, whether it's the crews or the public. When you go through these stressful incidents, there's no way, I don't think you can come out the other side without a sense of bonding and engagement with the different teams and the different crews. And then a good IMET should be learning. I've heard this applied in the aviation world. A good pilot's always learning. I think a good meteorologist, good scientist is always learning. This might come as a shock to most of you. We're not always right. Sometimes we get it wrong. But when we get it wrong, we should be asking those questions about what went wrong, how did it go wrong, and can we avoid that in the future? So, and then that's the application of our lessons to operations. And a lot of this occurs, I don't know if it's good or bad, it just is the way it is that this learning and applied lessons to operation oftentimes occurs outside of the bigger team, because you guys have the debriefs and the after action reviews, and we talk about what went well, what didn't go well, what do we want to change. But when it comes to the forecast, we're kind of left alone. So we rely on each other as sounding boards to bounce things off of for our scientific lessons learned. And a lot of times, if we have an F-band like Nick or somebody who's really, really weather savvy, we'll ask, does this make sense, or what are you seeing, just to get that extra perspective to make sure we're not blindsiding ourselves and operating in an environment where we have blinders on. This is something that I'd like you all to take away. I believe this is a quote from Vince Lombardi, but Larry Van Bussum, who is our program manager out of Boise, this is the IMET motto, and we say this all the time: in chasing perfection, we will catch excellence. And that's our goal. We know we won't be perfect, but if we're shooting for perfection and we miss by a little bit, we'll be in excellent shape. And that's sort of the way we operate. And if you have an IMET that maybe you think is dogging it, or maybe not chasing perfection, call them out on it. Tell them, the motto. So I'm putting ourselves out there for some accountability in that sense. So as Nick said, there are a few things in here that he doesn't know about me. So I've got a couple of degrees, one in geography and the other in meteorology and mathematics. And I went to school in the mid 80s to early 90s. Actually graduated with my second degree in December of 92 and started working with the Weather Service. And then my diploma caught up to me on my first duty station in 93. So that was kind of a fun little thing to talk about in the Weather Service. I was a member of the United States Air Force in the Air National Guard from 88 to 94. So I got to see the original Desert Storm and Desert Shield. And that was an interesting time as things were unfolding way back when, and learned a lot in the Air Force, and then became a Weather Service employee in 93. And went to Alabama and Texas to do most of my learning and kind of indoctrination in the Weather Service. And then I worked in what was called the Severe Local Storm Center. Used to be known as the National Severe Storms Forecast Center in Kansas City, that does all the tornado watches and severe thunderstorm watches, and has been renamed as the Storm Prediction Center now in Norman, Oklahoma. So I got to do that on a national scale from 95 to right about the May of 99. Saw several tornadoes in Oklahoma, which were noteworthy. And then I became a lead forecaster in Albuquerque, New Mexico, and worked with a couple of fire guys out there. One is Chuck Maxwell, who's working in the Southwest GAC, and I got to experience Cerro Grande from behind the Weather Service as a support personnel, and got to see some things unfold there. And that's really what piqued my interest in fire weather as I was starting to learn and see some things, and thinking about weather and applications and aviation and how everything kind of works together based on the forecast, and how important a good forecast is to operations. Then I was promoted to a science and operations officer in Brownsville, Texas for about 5 years. Worked a lot of tropical events, did training, not only severe weather training, but hydrological training, marine training, and also tropical weather was our main impacts. And then had the opportunity, it actually took 2 tries to get into the Spaceflight Meteorology group. But my first trip to Brownsville in 94, I was exposed to the Spaceflight Meteorology group in Houston. And when I saw that tour back in 94, I knew that was my dream job. So I kind of subconsciously looked for opportunities to make myself marketable if that job were to ever come open again. And it did in 2006 and 2007. And I got beat out by my mentor for the first job, but then got hired on the second round in 2007 and worked through the closeout of the shuttle program in 2011. And I know this is going to sound kind of crazy because I should remember this, but I'm pretty sure I worked 18 different missions in one capacity or another. It might be 20, but after about the first 5 or 6, they kind of you start losing track of how many you worked. But you do remember the teams, the crews, the different stress points and things like that went on. And it is very, very similar, as Nick said, it's very similar in a lot of ways to working wildland fire or just any fire operation that you're involved in. And then when this closed down, when NASA ended the shuttle program, there were 6 meteorologists at the Spaceflight Meteorology Group. They kept one back to support the rest of the programs, and he's still there. But the Weather Service really didn't want to lose the corporate knowledge that we had developed, not only for incident command, decision support services, and other things that the Weather Service was trying to spin up at the time. So they developed a pilot program called the Regional Operation Centers. And every region now in the Weather Service has one. There's one in Salt Lake City that serves the Western region. And they took 6 of us and made us ROC duty officers, and we basically leveraged all that experience that we had from NASA and poured it into the Weather Service to try to develop a coherent regional operation policy for different weather events that will come up. So we support FEMA for any kind of major disaster or major movement, so flooding, tropical systems, wildland fires, earthquakes, and other anthropological disasters. FEMA oftentimes will pull us into an operations center, and we will operate as a pseudo IMET. It's a little bit more infrastructure and a little bit better conditions than necessarily sleeping out in a campground, but the duties are pretty much the same as what an IMET would do on a fire. So I just wanted to let you know, if you ever see me out west, I went to high school and college in Colorado, and this is the University of Colorado where I got my first degree. And just wanted to show you that, yes, I do know what mountains are, even though I'm from Texas. And interestingly enough, I grew up learning to deal with Chinook winds that come over these ridges down through the Flatirons, and sometimes can blow at 100, 120 miles an hour down through Boulder. Very, very similar to your Santa Ana winds. I mean, it's the same physiological and physics. Same processes are going on. And so grew up kind of learning how to forecast that. And a very interesting story, and it's not fire related, but it got me thinking as I was reflecting on this. This is probably what got me really, really interested in weather, because at the time I wanted to be a pilot, and I took a class in this building right here, this physics laboratory. Took a class from a man named Murray Selby, who was a sailplane pilot and a physicist, and he actually broke the North American altitude record for altitude in a sailplane because he caught the leading edge of one of these Chinook wind events. So it's basically just like a wave breaking over the mountains, and he rode that wave. I think it was up close to somewhere in the order of like 60,000 feet. It was a really impressive event, and he had to clear out the airspace, get the forecast just right. But it helped me see how weather can really bend decisions one way or the other for go and no go events. And then as a senior in college, and then through my second degree, I worked here at the Mesa Lab. This is what's known as the National Center for Atmospheric Research. So I worked for a couple of scientists that were doing work on wave theory and wave generation over the tropics. And so I did a lot of flight planning, satellite analysis, and weather forecasting for them, even though I wasn't a meteorologist at the time. Started working with them and planning the research aircraft, the research flights. And that's really what kicked off my weather career. And also the fact that I did not get picked up as a pilot candidate by the Air Force. So that was kind of sad, but it turned out to be a good thing in the end. This is the Storm Prediction Center, again, where all the tornado forecasts are generated. Again, another hotbed of research for different severe weather events, whether it's hail production or tornado generation. Learned a lot there. Learned a lot about impact and big decisions being made on a national scale from the forecast aspect and forecast relevancy. And then just wanted to throw this in there. This is, again, won't shy away from this. This was my favorite job in the Weather Service so far. IMET is a very, very close second. But working at Mission Control, this was one of those jobs where I went to where it's like, I can't believe they pay me to do this. So, you know, we got to do all kinds of interesting operations with space flight, with other aircraft, satellite technology, different agencies around the world. Just so you know, one of the things at the Spaceflight Meteorology group that we had is it was such a big operation that we had 3 forecasters working for every launch and landing, and we would rotate through. So we would have what was called a TAL forecaster, and that's TAL, and that's for Transatlantic Oceanic Abort Landing Site, or Transoceanic Abort Landing Site. And we had 3 sites in Europe that we had to forecast for. One was in Istres, France. The other was in Zaragoza, Spain. And the other one was in Morón, Spain. And it was very, very interesting forecasting the weather for another continent at another time. But we had some very, very strong support crews, and that gave us good data and good intel as we were making our forecast for those areas. The lead forecaster, their sole responsibility was a 30-mile circle around the launch pad for launch. And then there's a track for most of the International Space Station missions. The track was up the East Coast and then back down over Europe. So for the first 8 minutes of flight before they could return, we had to have forecasts all the way up the East Coast that were divert opportunities or ditch opportunities if we had to for some reason had to abort what we call going uphill. So the best thing you could hear when you're the lead forecaster and they've already the solid rocket boosters have gone off is negative return, which means they're not coming back to the Cape. And then you can kind of breathe a sigh of relief because your responsibility has been completed. And then after they make it to orbit, the tile sites drop off, and then it becomes more of a stable environment for the forecast. But there's a lot of pressure with the entire team, billions of dollars on the line. And sometimes there can be intense pressure to give them a go when things are marginal or you're just not sure. The weather's never 100%. So this is some of the heaviest stress that I've ever felt. I know my first mission that I worked, I actually afterwards just kind of thought, can I do this? You know, it was really a heart-to-heart moment with myself. And, you know, I decided I wanted to do it, and that was a big part of it. So I kind of didn't know what I was getting into 100%, but I'm glad I did it because it made me a stronger meteorologist and probably a stronger team player out of the whole thing. Our motto there and throughout NASA is that launch is optional, but landing is mandatory. So once that spaceship goes up, it's going to come down, and it's going to come down somewhere, whether it's safe or, as we know in the tragedy of Columbia and Challenger, that it came back, but it didn't come back safely, and we lost both crews. So that was a big part. And there's a lot of parallels between NASA and the fire world. I don't know how many fire memorials I've been to and witnessed and participated in, but at NASA they do the same thing every January. They have what's called safety stand downs, where you stop and we reflect on not only Apollo 1, which was the fire on the pad, which is before my time, but still the legacy impacted us even 50 years later. And then the Challenger accident and then also the Columbia accident. So safety is a primary idea, and it's a primary motivator for everybody in the NASA team, as it is with the fire team. So making the transition to an IMET didn't seem that hard to me. It seemed very, very familiar, and it just feels like a great place for me to be. So one of our forecast landing sites for the shuttle is the Cape Kennedy, what we call KSC, out in Florida. Very, very different type of forecasting than Edwards Air Force Base, which is the dry lake bed out in Southern California. You're talking, one is a completely marine environment. You basically have a 3-mile long concrete pad that's sticking out into the ocean. And the other one is a high desert. And sometimes the weather parameters can be actually very, very different. One of my missions where we had to divert to Edwards, we were taking the last opportunity, it was a marginal opportunity. We got in there. If you know anything about the lake bed out there, during the afternoons, the wind can develop from the west and start to move east. It's almost like a sea breeze that gets developed, but it's inland. And this thing happened. They landed the shuttle, and within about 6 minutes after the wheels stopped and they were unpacking everything, you saw a dust devil and a tornado off in the distance on the monitors. And I called that into the flight directors and said, that's what I was worried about. And so we landed safely, but it kind of became one of those kind of like oh my moments where you just never know if you're going to get something rogue like that, like a fire whirl or a tornado or something like that in these extreme environments. So fire weather, let's talk about that. Forecasting for everything under the sun on any kind of incident. A lot of times we're tucked away with the F-band or in situation. That's my one of the pictures. I think this was from Gasquet. I like to go out and make observations and see as much as I can of all the different areas where I'm forecasting, as long as it's safe and I know that the forecast is stable and the crews are safe. But I just wanted to walk you through fairly quickly, what are the pressures that we're under. So I kind of get the sense that when we go out on fires as weathermen, we get the odd looks, we get the jokes. Yeah, that's all good and fun, and I totally get that because it's an unknown, and we stick out like a sore thumb. But when we're out there, there's no time for us to waste. And when I train a new IMET, one of the things that I tell them is that when the words "I'm your IMET" come out of your mouth on a fire, you had better be ready to brief. So there's a whole lot of background stuff that goes on in the preparation before we even set foot into a fire camp. We are on call during the traditional fire season. I have been deployed for every month out of the year except January. Almost made it to January on the Thomas fire, but I got home on December 29th. But so it can be any time of the year where we're out supporting, just like you guys are. We are a self-sufficient weather office, so that means we're responsible for our radar coverage. We bring our balloons for upper air. We are responsible for our communication, internet if it's not provided. Now, most teams now provide a good internet connection point. We do all the scheduling, and we do all the watches, warnings, and advisories for anything that could happen on the incident. So we really are self-sufficient, but we're not out there totally without support because we do tie into the local weather service office. And I usually rely very heavily on the local offices for intel and also for some weather watches when I have to sleep. So setting up the office, it's gotten a lot easier than it has been in the past. So we have our laptops, which are pretty stable. And our data connection points now are lots more stable. We don't have to set up a satellite dish like we used to years ago. Now it's all just Wi-Fi and cell phones and things like that. So some of the advancements have been really, really fabulous and made our jobs a lot easier. but we've managed to fill that time up with more data. So one of the first things I like to do on the fire is find the F-band if I haven't talked to them. If I haven't talked to them from the road, but usually I will call them as soon as I get my resource order and try to get some intel of what's going on the ground. I think one of the happiest moments on a fire for an F-band is when the IMET shows up, because every single one of them that I've been on a fire with is like, okay, here, you do the forecast, it's your briefing, because I don't think anybody likes to do the weather. We usually operated around 16 hours a day, trying to keep that 8-hour rest period, doing everything, observations, pulling in model data, doing wind ninja grids, you name it, and we're running all kinds of data. So a lot of times for the IT folks, we're part of their biggest nightmare, but they understand that. Oh, can you guys hang on a second? Hey, Nick. Nick?
Yeah, you got me?
Yeah, somebody rang my doorbell and the dog's going crazy. Can I pause here for a second?
Of course, no problem.
Okay. Sorry about that. I'll be back in a second.
Okay. I'm just glad that wasn't us.
I totally apologize for that. I thought I was going to be able to get away with this. We went through a hailstorm about 8 weeks ago, and the gutter guy showed up this morning, and so he's ringing the doorbell, making the dog go crazy. So sorry about that.
Since you're functioning pro bono, we won't hold it against you.
Well, it's like any kind of incident stress management. All of a sudden we're going along fine, and boom, something happens, and got to deal with it. So thanks for your patience, and I really do appreciate your kindness on that. So let me get back to the show here. Okay, so doing all the observations, carrying our equipment and computers, we really do have to be self-sufficient. And once you get used to the routine, it's not that bad. I do a lot of air travel, so I've got my whole system set up, and every IMET does things differently because we are individuals, but there are some baseline things that really ought to be expected from your IMET. So I'm a fan of Office Space. I don't know if you've all seen that, but there's a point where two guys named Bob are consultants coming into a company, and they call them the Bobs. And this is how they start the conversation. What is it you say you do here? So a lot of times we get that from the crews. They know that we're weather and that we have a part in the briefing, and we put our forecast in the ICP. I've seen everything from the weatherman never gets it right to people that are really, really into weather and they want to learn more. So just so you know what we do, and this is the way I do my fires as a template. Sometimes it shifts around based on the briefing times, but generally I'm up around 4:30 checking observations, looking to make sure that everything that happened in the overnight sleep period is as it should be, that there are no surprises going on, no big changes. Then about 5 o'clock, I'll hit the ops planning meeting and give a real just kind of down and dirty briefing to ops and the different division chiefs and division supervisors that are there, and especially if they're working an operation or planning an operation that's weather sensitive. That's kind of the time where we get down and really just kind of eyeball to eyeball, and this is what I really think is going to happen. And then usually about 6 o'clock, do the entire camp and crew briefing, including any kind of remote briefings on the radio for the different spike camps that may need them. And then make myself available for any kind of one-on-one questions or anything that the divisions need, if the IC needs anything in particular. And then at 9 o'clock, we usually have our GAC, Geographic Area Coordination Center calls, and our weather forecast offices are all on there. And Nick can attest to this. He's seen this where it's all the offices talking about what's on their mind, how this forecast is coming together. Are we all seeing the same thing? Is somebody seeing something different? What do we need to be on the lookout for? It's a great place for kind of long lead intel for the weather forecast and also long-term planning. We do media interviews, and we have to do training and make sure that we navigate the media sort of minefield, just like you all do with certain aspects of firefighting. We have to navigate the climate change thing. That seems to be the biggest one, is everyone wants to know about climate change, and are these fires due to climate change? So we have to diplomatically, walk that line between science and media sound bites. If we're lucky, by 11 o'clock, maybe able to get out and observe some fire line activity, or go around and look at our remote observation site, or IROS. Usually we'll pick up a command and general staff briefing at noon if required. And then got about 3 hours really to put the forecast together. And I say put the forecast together because all the way up through, let's say, giving this briefing at 6 and then getting on the GAC call. So you have about 6 hours here to think about the briefing. So a lot of times people will see me out and about, and I'm not really engaged in conversation because I'm thinking about what I've seen this morning. What are the models? The early morning model input. What did I hear on the GAC call? How is that going to impact the next operational impact forecast for the next operational period? And how is that going to affect the long-term planning forecast, especially if we're getting to the point where we may be transitioning out of a fire and handing it back to the locals. They're going to need support, long-range support. It's very different than the next operational period. So a lot of those thoughts are just rolling around in my head. So if you see an IMET out there and they just kind of seem like they're distant, it might be that they're just actually really, really deep in thought about the forecast, even though they're not sitting in front of their computer terminal. And then do our planning meeting for the next cycle. Get that IAP forecast in before the deadline for plans, and then attend any kind of debriefs that I'm allowed to, and then usually do the end of shift unless there is a weather element that needs to be monitored overnight. But a lot of times, if we have to, we'll hand over the radar coverage to the local office overnight and ask them to wake us up, to give us a call and wake us up if there's something that's getting within, say 10 miles of the impact area. So for all of our briefings, one of the things I like to train new IMETs on is that they need to know their audience and they need to know their message. So you can't be an expert in everything, but you certainly have to be a subject matter expert in your field. So some of the climatological things that we do, I've done this. I've done 10-day outlooks for handing over to LTANs and also closing things out. I think the longest outlook I did was for a month, and it was really just a monsoon climatology, and it was pretty challenging to put that information out there and have people relying on it for the next month. So we'll use a lot of caveats like, after 2 weeks, this might be totally worthless. So just use it at your own peril and use it with caution. We do all hazards forecasting, winds in the camp. Logistics needs to know about that. safety is a big customer of ours as far as heat safety, flooding, snags, impacts, you name it. And then also PIO. We do a lot of work with PIO, especially now that Facebook and a lot of these online social media places, you can do live briefings there. So that just adds another element of briefing into our day, which is good because it forces us to make our message understandable, makes our message clear and concise, and you can tie it in with the rest of the team. So it gives us an added piece of relevance for the weather forecast. Sub-severe impacts that we look for: dust. I've actually had snow and ice on some fires. Snags. Sub-severe winds can bring down trees. It doesn't take more than 20, 25 miles an hour to bring down some of the damaged trees. And I've seen a lot of that on my fires. And then, of course, one of the things that we always get from the F-band is they want the inputs for the fire behavior and for the fuel models. Sometimes we've done impromptu weather classes. Now, when I'm at home, I'll actually teach for the fire academies here in Texas. I'll teach mainly 390, which is the fire behavior analyst class. But we do have weather sections in 190 and 290 that meteorologists will teach for the different fire training and fire academy classes. I always plan for a lot of data outages. So I've learned to be self-reliant and also to use the computer on top of my shoulders when the computer in front of me usually fails. So I've seen a lot of weather, and I'm not trying not to sound like I'm full of myself, but I've been doing this for about 30 years. So I've seen a lot of different weather. I've seen it in a lot of different environments, and I have a good basic understanding of what might be going on. But if I feel like if I don't feel confident, like I know what's going on, I'm reaching out to the local office. A lot of times what I will do when I hit camp is I'll try to find whoever lives there locally, whoever's from the forest, anybody that has lived here for a long time can tell me what do I need to look out for. That has been probably the biggest lifesaver that I've had on fires, is actually sitting down and listening to local folks tell me about what weather they experience and what really worries them. So that saved my bacon a few times, which I'm very thankful for their willingness to share that and share that knowledge with me. Transferring of duties, continuing our operations, making sure that the next IMET who's coming in, if there is one, has all the information that I have. And then also we have to manage our agency policies and our accounting information. So with all that, one of the things that I always like to do, especially if there's a complex air operation, is get out to the air base and talk to the pilots, talk to the controllers. A lot of times we have to go out there to launch balloons. We try to launch them from their facilities because it gives us a good idea of some of the winds above the surface that could impact their takeoff and landing operations. Again, intel for these new type of decision tools, model data that comes in for GIS, and then of course the good old IRAS. Nothing can substitute actually eyes on the ground, taking weather and seeing what's happening from the different locations around our fires. This is another thing that I really like to do is I don't get to see too many fire outlooks. So anytime I'm out west or in a national forest, I'm always looking to see where there's a fire lookout. And I believe this one was on the Willamette. And the couple that was working this, he was in an association. I think it's the Experimental Aircraft Association. And he was talking about someone named Paul Dye. And I said, "Hey, I know Paul Dye." And he goes, "You do?" I was like, "Yeah, I worked with him at NASA." So it was a small world. I traveled all the way out to the Willamette from Texas and met a guy that we had a mutual friend in there. So it kind of gave me a warm feeling. It was fun to actually be able to talk to somebody about something other than fire. But he showed me how they spot things, how they do the lookout, how the operations work. So I learned a lot out there, and how the fire lookouts, how detailed they are and how committed they are to making sure that they do everything correctly and don't make any mistakes. So some of the cool places and really great people, that's one of the biggest things that I'd like to communicate about the IMET program, is even though we're not firefighters, you guys all accept us as if we were. You take us in, you teach us, you care for us, and we try to do that in return, is to let you know that we are here, we're serious about what we do, and I think a lot of us do take the forecast personally, and if something bad goes on, I think a lot of us take that personally too. So that's probably the IMET's biggest nightmare. The thing that would make you wake up in a cold sweat is to have like a shelter deployment or a burn over or something like that happen, and have people that said, they weren't prepared for the weather. So that's probably our biggest moment of anxiety, is if something like that were to happen. Thankfully, it doesn't happen all that often. We don't get too much surprise weather. But again, it's unpredictable, and the fire is going to do what it's going to do, especially in some of those days when it's super unstable and you're dealing with a Haynes index of 6, and it's just been churning and burning for days. So I threw this picture in here down at the left. I don't know if anybody knows what that is, but this was taken on the Thomas Fire from the Ventura County Fairgrounds. We came out of the night planning meeting. This was, I can't remember what, I think it was 2018. And this was back at the height of the North Korean missile. Everyone was all tense about North Korea launching missiles into the West Coast. And this rocket took off, and everybody was freaked out. And I said, well, it's going the wrong way. It was headed south down the coast. And I said, it's going the wrong way. That came out of Vandenberg. And it turned out that was a SpaceX or an Atlas launch out of Vandenberg over the Atlantic, or over the Pacific, excuse me. But it was really neat to see, the physics of the atmosphere light up the plume, and then light up all this plasma and gas that was blowing off there. But it was nice to be able to tell people confidently, hey, we're going to be okay. Don't worry about this. And then the news cycle caught up with us in about 15 minutes and said, yeah, it was a launch out of Vandenberg, caused a big stir over Southern California, but everything was going to be okay. So getting certified, we have task books just like everybody else. We go through the FEMA courses 1 through 800, which are incident management type courses. And then we do ICS 300, and then we have to do all the S 190, 290, 390 courses. And then we have continual excellence exercises in Boise every year. And we also have a continuation of COMET, which is a weather service training site where we have advanced fire weather courses and new research, new technology that's come from any of the research labs, as far as what we can do to be better and more accurate forecasters, and help in the prediction of fire activity and fire behavior. So our task books are the same. They follow the same standard as the wildland fires qualification system. Excuse me. So we have 21 distinct behaviors. There's a whole host of tasks in each one. And the best way I could put this is that, as a certified IMET, our Larry Van Bussum, our program manager, wants us to get our method down before we become trainers. So even though we may be in the weather service for a long time, if they've only been an IMET for 2 or 3 years, they probably won't be training anybody. But having a trainee is probably one of the toughest things to do, but also one of the most gratifying things, to see someone get it and pass their certification and know that they're ready to go. And there's a whole host of things that go into this, and everything from briefing, being able to deliver a briefing, to documentation, to paperwork, to knowing the policies, and of course, knowing the meteorology and hazards. Those are all evaluated by trainers, and usually each trainee will have gone through 3 different certified IMET trainers before they're even recommended for certification. So it's a serious process, because we want to make sure that we serve the teams and the crews to the best of our ability, and that we don't have anybody get through that kind of falters in the moment of truth. So I'm going to go ahead and end it here. I just wanted to let you know that a lot of times you'll see us clustered around in sort of, I like to call it the voodoo tent, because that's where all the witchcraft and wizardry goes on between the F-band and the IMETs with all this data. But this was the Speybroeck fire when I got there. She was training in, this is Angie and Yeti from Jacksonville, Florida. This is Sean Lukes, who was an ARA, but now is a certified IMET from Houston, and Julia Rutherford, who is now working in, I believe, Reading at the GAC up there in Reading. So we do go up every now and then observing in the aircraft, just to make sure we get a good feel for the lay of the land. A lot of times that can help us refine some of the forecast, but now with Google Earth and some great satellite technology, sometimes these are, you can get the same data on the computer, but it is good to get out in the field. There's no substitute for being in the field. And my favorite picture is, when all else fails, just eat the Uncrustables. That'll always bring a smile to your face on a fire. And we do, in the IMET program, we do memorialize and remember all the fallen firefighters. And we have taken actually a page out of the wildland fire environment, in the fact that the Weather Service has now adopted a critical incident stress management program. And we actually have a person in Washington, D.C. now that is overseeing the critical incident stress, not only for wildland fires, but also for the different weather events that people go through. So that's something that you all have given us, and we've taken it gladly, and we're going forward with it. So with that, I'm going to end it here and go see if there are any questions. Anything at all, it's all open and fair game. So if you have questions for me, just let me know.
Hey, Kurt, Layla has a question, and then if anybody else has questions, there's a little raise hand feature. There's about 30 people on the call, so maybe we'll try to manage it like that. So awesome, Kurt, really appreciate it. And we'll go to Layla's question.
Yeah,
Hi, Kurt.
hopefully I didn't miss it. Okay.
Hi, Kurt. This is Layla. I'm a professor at UCSB, also meteorologist. Thank you so much for your talk. It was very insightful. And my question for you is, we have been doing a lot of trying to understand fire weather for a long time now. And I feel we have so much to learn from you guys. And I also feel that all the work we do, we would like also to pass along, to contribute. And I feel we are failing with this dialogue. When you mention your what you use, and then you talk about wind ninja and all those kind of things, and so I feel, what can we do to improve this dialogue? Because we learn from you guys. I learned a lot from Rob Hazard, just by his own experiences in talking about these fires we have had here. And I feel we need sometimes, just to add this, we try to reconstruct those fires and always scratching our hands. Oh, maybe this happened. Oh, maybe this other thing happened. And then if we have more of this dialogue, we would advance much more, I feel, in the fire weather issue.
That's a great point. And I have one idea. It may not be the answer, but it's at least a start. Because in my mind, the way I see fire behavior and weather is that a lot of times the fire itself, especially an intense fire, overwhelms the environment, and it forces the weather to do what the fire wants it to do, not the other way around. There are times when the weather makes the fire do something, but a lot of times, in the, I think it was the campfire or the car fire, where they had the fire tornado, and that I believe that was caused by the intent, just the overwhelming energy that was released by the fire, that it was going to do its own thing. But that's my opinion, and I say that to say this is that if you can send me your email, I'm going to ask Larry if we can somehow get in the fire program during our yearly exercise. It's usually in March. If we can have invited talks by different researchers, whether it's the Missoula lab or you at UCSB, but somebody to come up with a consistent effort to tie the IMET program into, at least have contact with the research facilities instead of the one-off, a forecaster here and a forecaster there, but actually have a consistent program. And do you know Robin Heffernan? Have you heard that name? Yeah, she operates as like our science officer. She's doing a really good job of pushing articles and research to us, but we seem to have a problem of like generating input from us into the university system. So I think Robin would be the key, but also asking for a spot in the IMET CEE, which is done every March. And I'll bring that up to Larry and Robin and see if we can somehow get some invited talks by researchers to help solve some of these problems.
Thank you, Kurt. Yes, I will share my email with you and later on. Thank you, Nick.
Thanks, Layla. We have a question from Glenn Gazdecki. He's our local air pollution control district person. Go ahead, Glenn.
Thanks, Nick. Kurt, thank you very much for that presentation and joining us today. As Nick was mentioning, I'm the smoke management coordinator for the county. I work very closely with the fire agencies on prescribed burning. And I appreciate the relationship we have with the National Weather Service on spot forecasts, which was very helpful leading up to prescribed burns. But a lot of the focus we talked about today really was on fire behavior. Of course, the negative social externality of that is smoke. And so I assume you guys work very closely with air advisors on the smoke component. But my question is, there's actually a requirement in Title 17 here in the state of California that when there is a wildfire, there's supposed to be a smoke management plan for the wildfire, as well as if it was a prescribed burn. Now, I've never required it. I've never had that, because my respect for the urgency of dealing with a fire and the public safety has always come first. And frankly, I was unaware of it for a long time. Have you ever had occasion or your agency to work closely in California on smoke management plans with fire agencies during a wildfire?
Well, during the Soberanus, and I do know that on the Soberanus we had the air resource advisors, and there were Weather Service employees. But as far as working in the policy, I don't know that we've ever done that. Mm-hmm. We support the smoke program and the blue sky program with weather data and weather support, but I don't know. I'm not aware of anything other than some Weather Service IMETs that are qualified as ARAs. I'm not aware of them doing anything as far as putting those plans out.
Yeah. There's a group called CANSAC, California, Nevada Air Meteorologist Group, and they have really reached out to a lot of the air districts trying to help with the meteorology component, forecasting and using smoke models. So it's been really a great relationship there. And if you haven't heard of them, I just kind of put that out there as well.
Yeah, I do know that the air quality is definitely a big issue, especially up and down California primarily, but up and down the West Coast. places like Arizona and less populated areas, not so much because they don't have as much densely populated effects. But yeah, it's definitely a big part of what we do, and anything we can do to help out, by all means, let us know.
Great, thanks.
So
I had a question, Kurt, Nick. You know, we've been having some pretty significant heat waves out west. We had one a couple weeks ago, and they're calling for pretty extraordinary one to hit the Northwest, I think, in the next couple days. Can you maybe just talk about, you know, the patterns that exist that contribute to these heat waves?
Yeah, this is part of the seasonal change. So without sounding too nerdy and geeky, it's we've been watching the La Nina El Nino cycle starting to shift and change, and it is changing, and the transition to neutral has been almost complete, and it not only affects the overall what we call the synoptic pattern, which is basically, you know, like on the order of the United States or United States and Canada, the North American scale type models. So really, we've got this persistent ridge over the western part of the U.S. and a persistent trough over the eastern half of the country. That pattern is locked in. So yeah, in the next month or so, you can expect periodic heat waves out west, dry conditions, and out here we're actually seeing cooler than normal and a lot more water in Texas than we've seen in a long time. So that pattern shifts, and then when it breaks down, we could go into some of the global patterns, but when it finally breaks down and the atmosphere tries to find its balance again, it'll probably go back to where you guys are starting to see more passing fronts and more temperate weather and onset of rain during the rainy season versus what you've seen in the past couple of months.
Awesome, thanks.
Did that answer your question, or do I have to do 20 push-ups for that?
No, I think that's good enough. Maybe just 10 push-ups. Any other questions for Kurt from the audience here? All right, seeing none. Kurt, truly appreciate it. You're a real professional. It's always a pleasure, and hopefully can you give stop the host rights? I just want to make sure if you log out that the meeting doesn't end.
Okay, I will look to do that.